one amazing and wonderful thing about what's happened, with the Palestine solidarity movement is that we're starting to relearn how to make connections across different movements and have solidarity. And it's by recognizing the global world historical importance of this struggle of Palestine that we will then be able to kind of make connections to oppose empire everywhere, fascism at home, and try and subordinate some of these other kind of minor, I don't want to say they're minor, but they're just unimportant in the face of genocide. I mean, what is more important when we're struggling here right now for the most basic condition of the dignity of the human? Okay. And to include everybody in the human. Exactly. So that's the big tent.
I want to ask you guys about how Jewish Voice for Peace have been directly received by these large Jewish institutions. And because when I talk about the anti-Semitism hoax, I'm talking about anti-Semitism, especially as the way they present it, because I refer as Palestinians as Semitic people, but the overall presentation of it, because think about what was happening under Biden. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Joe Biden's a Catholic, right? Joe Biden, a Catholic, and his administration smeared Jewish Voice for Peace as an anti-Semitic organization. So think about what happened here. A Catholic smeared a Jewish organization for not supporting the Catholic sending bombs to fascist Jewish people so they can bomb Muslims and Christians in the Middle East. You guys see how ridiculous that is? So I want to ask you this follow-up, and then I'm going to get Nan in here. What has been the reaction regarding the Jewish institutions to you guys?
Okay, I'll keep it short. I really want to hear Adnan too. At the beginning, the Bay Area, that's where we started in Berkeley, was much more open than New York or LA, for example. That's where we sort of got started. So the Jewish community centers at the time allowed us to rent rooms if we needed it or whatever. The one in Berkeley, I think, was much more open that way. So we had a big award dinner, our first of our kind, I don't know how long ago, at the San Francisco Jewish Community Center. We rented the big hall there they had, and it was a good night. And Judith Butler spoke, and she's quite a good, she has a very good position on this. She's a feminist philosopher. That's how she describes herself at UC Berkeley, quite well known. And it was a well done night. So after that, I guess the people that run the San Francisco JCC, they immediately redid their charter. So any group renting there had to support Israel as a Zionist state. No matter what, they could have a cookie, a cookie bake-off or something. So they essentially wrote that in to blackball us, and that happened pretty quickly. That's a typical response. I was by name when I came back I did International Solidarity Movement work in 2002 during the Second Intifada. And when I came back, we had gotten a lot of press then for various reasons. Anyway, I was accused of all sorts of awful things. And I wrote in the newspaper. So I wrote the rabbi a letter, and he had to officially apologize to me. And so we get that a lot. It's very knee-jerk. And that's how we're trained. I was brainwashed into this. I'm just a very precocious kid. I was very contrarian, probably like most people here. But it's hard for people to come out of that. It's a brainwashing. I mean, you have a whole sick society. Again, I see how I'm keeping Israel out of it because they're just a bunch of they're like at a fort on the plains in Nebraska in 1880. It's filled with infantry soldiers that are American infantry soldiers, as far as I'm concerned, and it doesn't exist except as a fort. You take out those troops, our support, there is no place. And so that's why I'm not talking about it. But I think I think this is something Jews more coming out, especially young Jews. I've seen that, which is the prize. Young people are radicalized by this. And I think in 10, 20 years, my optimistic side, there will be a sea change in this country if it isn't gone fully fascist.
Right. And I know that I'm upset a lot of my anti-Zionist Jew brothers and sisters, but you need to understand that a lot of my frustration is how they treat you. That's why I don't understand why people are upset. I'm frustrated with how they treat you, how they retaliate against you, how they attack the people in their own community, right? But I appreciate. Go ahead, Rob.
Very quickly, in that regard, I don't care about me, and I've gotten a very thick skin. A lot of us, the lefties I know that are Jewish, say it's not about us. Back then, it's always about this incredibly awful occupation. When you see it up close, you can't imagine it, and I can imagine a lot. And it's about the genocide. And if you're fronting anything else that isn't trying to work in service in one way or another, writing postcards, whatever, to try and go against the genocide as the first thing you do, then I don't understand. I mean, and I constantly get a lot of flack within groups like Jewish Voice for Peace because I'm pretty steady-eyed on that. I've always been that way. I said, hey, you guys, this is crappy parliamentarianism. What about the Palestinians? And I'm not trying to bang my own drum. I'm just saying that it has to be that way.
Right.
And otherwise, I mean, we have no moral floor.
Yeah.
Anyway,
if I could just add really quickly, to this part of the discussion as well. I know you want to bring in on.
No, it's open discussion, so feel free.
Yeah, I mean, this just reminds me also of how in the movement here over the last 10 years, you'll see how so-called anti-Zionist Jewish groups will tell Palestinian groups not to work with groups like Nudarai Karda, calling them out, saying that they don't have the right politics on certain things, or saying, oh, well, they don't really support Palestine. It's just against their religious ideology to support an Israeli state. Well, you know what? Guess what? 9 times out of 10, who's showing up? Who has our backs? Who's placing their bodies on the line physically between us and the Zionists that are trying to pepper spray us and, attack our people? It's groups like Nudarai Karda. There's all these smears they say about them. They claim that they deny the Holocaust, which some of them are actually descendants of Holocaust survivors. They'll say that they don't believe in Palestinian human rights, when if you actually hear them speak at any given time, they do support Palestinian human rights. They reject the state of Israel. And so, this idea of Jewish so-called anti-Zionist Jews attacking other anti-Zionist Jews, when, the people they're attacking are actually, show up way more and have better politics than they do, is frustrating. And, who are they to tell Palestinians, who our allies are? It's as if we're too stupid to understand or discern what is helpful or negative towards our movement. I understand they may have some religious perspectives that may not vibe with non-religious people. Well, guess what? We have religious Muslims in our community that may have beliefs that they don't agree with. So that's not something that we test people on. It's about how forcefully they reject the genocide, because it's easy to say, oh, I don't like killing people. That's like saying I don't like Hitler. I don't like genocide. Well, what are you actually going to do about it? How are you actually going to carry, that out? And, your commitment isn't a tweet or going or showing up to one march. It's what are you doing, every single day? And JVP will come walking on the Sabbath, because they're not supposed to be using cars and stuff like that to attend our protests. They'll ask us what we need. And that's more than I can say about, any other anti-Zionist or Jewish organization, here in New York City, honestly. But that's not to say that Jewish people themselves, haven't been showing up. It's just the ones that do show up the most often aren't part of these Jewish orgs, and they're not using their Jewish identity to kind of prop themselves up. We have Jewish people within our lifetime. There's Jewish people in SJPs. There's Jewish people in groups like Pal Action, but they don't make, their identity the center of this. And, they're not, trying to save Judaism from Zionism. They're trying to save Palestinians from genocide. And that's a distinction that I think people don't get caught up in. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a fantastic way to put it. I really want to get our friend Nan in. I appreciate your patience, my brother. But this is exactly what I wanted. I wanted more of an open dialogue and conversation. Our friends at Gorilla Pod. I definitely I think I'm gonna join your podcast here soon, I believe. But it's great. I want to get your thoughts on this. I know we covered a lot of ground in the first 30 minutes here. So the theme was about Dio-fascism, but you can take it wherever you want. I know you got a lot of thoughts.
Well, you've covered a lot. And firstly, thank you so much for having me on. Yes, Guerrilla History podcast. Me and my co-host have been on your podcast before. But yes, you're going to come on to the struggle session, which is a new live stream panel that, I'm running on my own show, which is meant to be a place just like this panel where we can have honest discussions and self-critical analysis. Because to be honest, when I think about what's happening and how we have these sort of Twitter battles and what's going on in the pro-Palestine solidarity movement and all of that, I just feel so, I feel so frustrated because actually we have all failed. We have absolutely failed, and we have to hold ourselves accountable because we have not stopped this genocide. And everything that comes up that requires us to be distracted and have fruitless debates that weaken and divide us is actually contributing to the Zio-fascist kind of approach to politics, which is to continue to be able to have the space. It's a race right now. It's a race between whether the political pressure of the free people of the world everywhere coming together to try and put pressure on their politicians to stop, to intervene, versus the genocide, the people who are trying to accomplish the genocide. And the more time we give them, the more they advance in the genocide. So we don't have time really to waste. And I'm just overwhelmed by our failure. And you have had lots of critiques, Nick, about the unseriousness of the Western left. And I have to say, this is indeed, where is Palestine action? It was great in the UK. One group of a few people did a couple of actions in the United States, and they got absolutely slammed by this incredible backlash and all the full force of this authoritarian state to crush it. And then we've heard nothing. In the beginning, we had a few really amazing Jewish voices for peace, kind of direct action takeovers of spaces. I mean, I don't know if these are still continuing, but they're certainly not getting the attention. And so what I'm seeing is we need to be ramping up right now the level of our commitment. And I like Nardine, and firstly, just, congratulations to you. And it was so wonderful also just hearing about similar experiences. I was a professor in New York before moving to Canada during the post 9/11 era, and had to teach Middle East and Islamic courses in the context there. And definitely what I'm seeing happening, the bankruptcy of all Western institutions, whether it's international law, whether it's the university. You talked about it at the top, Nick, about paying off Columbia University, paying off groups in order to avoid actually confronting the fact that its entire endowment is invested in things that help perpetuate the genocide. Instead of recognizing that, taking responsibility and living by genuine ideals of responsibility, of humanity. So what we're seeing is a crisis of humanity right now. The very dignity of the human is under attack. And so we have to ramp up our resistance. We can't and I understand completely where you were coming from. Your frustration. You were watching, babies being murdered, starved to death. We see them. Of course, it just induces such utter despair. The question is, however, are we going to have a politics of despair and revenge, or are we going to try and transform this situation? I mean, Malcolm X said it in that famous speech, the ballot or the bullet, right? He said, you either give a solution on the ballot, or there's going to be the bullet. There's going to be a racial bomb. He would threaten. He said, look, if you don't solve this, there's going to be. And I feel like we're on the cusp of that, because right now there's so much rage and frustration with every institution, with all our politicians, including Bernie Sanders, AOC. These people, nobody was really paying attention to them, but the last few people who might have been paying attention to them on the left now see that there's absolutely no reason to be investing in politics as usual. So the real question is what kind of organizations are we going to build now to try and put a stop to the genocide? And I mean, all I can see is that, we're at a kind of impasse. There's so much rage and frustration. It's boiling up, and you can see even the liberal politicians like my Prime Minister Mark Carney in Canada, Keir Starmer, this disgusting, so-called human rights lawyer who said it was allowable to cut off food, water, energy, electricity to the people of Gaza because Israel had a right to defend itself. He now is trying to whitewash, his own complicity in genocide by making these words about, how terrible the situation is in Gaza and how we have to do something. All I see is them failing to make a commitment to a genuine arms embargo, to trade and other kinds of sanctions upon Israel. All they are trying to do is to immunize themselves from the judgment of history in the future, and also for the politics of accountability. And that's what I see us having to organize right now, is accountability politics. We are going to prosecute all of these people as war criminals, and they need to know that now. And they're a little fearful of that now. I think they're starting to get the picture that they need to make some symbolic gestures in order to immunize themselves. But we can't, be distracted by this. We have to continue the pressure and actually innovate new mechanisms and new means of resisting and putting on, political pressure.
Yeah, and that's exactly what these discussions are for, is us coming together and brainstorming these ideas. Because there's like this very weird tendency among the incompetent U.S. left where they will just cancel each other over small disagreements. There's like no real mutual aid society being built, no alternative government, because what we should be doing is creating our own alternative government. And as we organize more people, we have our own militia. We have our own mutual aid society. So there's no capitalist retaliation. We need to start taking that stuff off the table right now. And now is the time we need to start forming coalitions and hitting the streets to fight this genocidal Zionist regime, which is what I've been focused on since I started politics. Because to me, it was clear that they was escalating this genocidal mindset in the West. Like, I don't know if you remember, Nardine, I had Palestinian roundtables even before October 7th. It was one of my top priorities. People like, why won't Nick shut the fuck up about Israel, Palestine? This was before October 7th. I don't know if you remember this, Nardine, but that's how I became introduced to you. When we had this panel, I had you on. We've been following each other ever since then, because it was clear to me that we need to get serious, stop organizing within a genocidal Zionist party. And I view it as beyond the pale that anyone would even organize with a party that normalizes racism to begin with. So now we need a serious, organized front against Zionism, because I believe 100%, and I believe this with my heart and soul, as someone who covered this my entire life, the fight against Zionism is the fight of our lifetime. And there is no statute of limitation for genocide. Hey, I'm still a young man. You guys want to know what I'm going to be doing for the next 60 years? Locking up these genocidal Zionists. What's a better life goal than that? What else gives you purpose more than spending your lifetime, which I will be doing, trying to lock every single member of the IDF up, locking up every single politician complicit with this? Nardine, I saw you mute. We kind of went around the panel, so we can have more of a free-flowing conversation if you guys want to chime in. Nardine, you can chime in. Rob, I saw you on mute as well. So let's go in that order if you guys have any thoughts.
Really quickly, I mean, like you said, it's a litmus test. Like Palestine, what's happening is really the indicator of our time. And, I don't trust anyone who says that they believe in whatever progressive cause they claim to believe in, if they fail to meet that level when it comes to Palestine. And even when I was also very involved in supporting like Black liberation struggle, even before 2020, like back in 2014, I was marching before like the first iteration of Black Lives Matter. But even then, the organization that I was a part of even critiqued the watering down. Like they said, BLM is BLM Black Lives Matter or Black Liberation Movement. And if you look towards the Black radical tradition, it's always been anti-Zionist, and like, the lessons that we get out of that movement, if you apply them to Palestine today, like that is they're still applicable, even from the 60s and 70s and 80s. And so, I do think it's important for us, for people to look at anti-Zionism in that lens, supporting the Palestine liberation movement in that lens, because if you understand it from that perspective, then, the way that you fight for all of these other causes will also be illuminated, and it'll be harder, to be confused or just kind of like tricked by these liberals who will, take on these progressive causes. You'll even have corporations claim to support them, when in reality they're antithetical, to people's movements everywhere.
Yeah, no, I wanted to say, yes, a hearty yes to all of this, because that's I kind of implied or pointed to this effort to try and come up with a broader coalition of left-oriented groups, nominally labor, something like the United Auto Workers and things like that, more radical, because obviously a lot of unions in this society are not that radical. But the idea is, what are the natural kind of collaborators? And maybe parts of JVP, I don't know, for example, but we have a lot of presence, so why not try to work with, that's my approach, but I'm not trying to change their system so much. I use them and whatever, but the idea is to come up with some kind of broad coalition. In that respect, I don't know if you heard, a couple of weeks ago, there was the first kind of, since the Jewish Bund was, it met in Austria to start it up again. So people are paying attention. These are left, again, as I said, left, anti-Zionist, definitionally. And they met. And that happened a couple of weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago. And so to the extent we could start to weave ourselves together and not get split apart. And my question to everyone here is, what are some solutions? I mean, that's one way I'm trying to go, but are there other ways? I mean, you're not going to work through DSA or any of those per se, but I don't know. I'm posing that question for everyone.
Anan or Dean? Anan?
Well, I mean, this is always the big and difficult kind of question, how to organize. I mean, the problem with us is that we've had 40 years of neoliberalism atomizing us, making us, kind of think, that there's no possibility of solidarity. One amazing and wonderful thing about what's happened, with the Palestine solidarity movement is that we're starting to relearn how to make connections across different movements and have solidarity. And it's by recognizing the global world historical importance of this struggle of Palestine that we will then be able to kind of make connections to oppose empire everywhere, fascism at home, and try and subordinate some of these other kind of minor, I don't want to say they're minor, but they're just unimportant in the face of genocide. I mean, what is more important when we're struggling here right now for the most basic condition of the dignity of the human? Okay. And to include everybody in the human. Exactly. So that's the big tent. And, I think the real question is, I see, for example, that Marjorie Taylor Greene is, sort of saying that it is a genocide. She is criticizing the Trump and Trump support for the Israeli attack on Iran and the, U.S. attack on Iran. And yet, at the same time, that's to me where the real anti-Semitism is coming from. Okay, so like I know, you said, Nick, that, don't tell me Nick Fuentes is an anti-Semite and it's real. Well, I would say, actually, we do have to observe that there are historic roots. You really need to understand both that Zionism relies upon and produces anti-Semitism. It's a mutually kind of reinforcing kind of arrangement, and that most of the Zionists in the world today are actually Christian Zionists. And in fact, the First World Congress, for a colonization effort was a Christian Zionist one. Why? Because it goes back to exactly why you said Biden, as a Catholic, could be telling, Jews who are resisting genocide and oppression or anti-Zionist to call them anti-Semitic. Well, it's because of the twisted logic that's happened, is that, the far right, Europe's solution to the Jewish question was, one solution was genocide them. The other solution was, get them out of here and turn them into colonizers, and then they can be part of the Western, kind of framework. They can be part of the imperial West. In other words, they can be junior partners within Latin Crusader Christendom, which was Islamophobic and anti-Semitic at the same time. And this is what people don't recognize and realize, is that the deeper, longer history is of the exclusion and of the racism and the religious bigotry, against the religions outside that fueled crusade, then later colonization and Western supremacy and domination over the world, and inside is against their religious others, and that were, religious others who were racialized and persecuted, inside Latin Christendom. And in fact, actually, in my period that I study, I'm a medieval historian. Usually it seems like it's pretty obscure, remote, and not very relevant to contemporary, thinking. But in fact,
check out the Guerrilla History podcast if you haven't. It's a great show.
Yeah, well, people should check out Guerrilla History podcast and my new show, Adnan Hussein Show, on YouTube and podcast. And I talk about these kinds of things. And the point here is that they're in fact actually in the Latin Christian persecuting Crusader imagination, they saw Jews as allies of the Muslims. Okay, they saw them as a potential fifth column inside that needed to be persecuted. So, in fact, the first big massacres and pogroms of Jews that took place in Europe, it didn't happen in the 700s, 800s, 900s. It happened as a result of the preaching of the Crusades. They said, we're going out to Crusades, but, we're going to go kill the Muslims, and take back the Holy Land and establish, Christ's, kingdom there. But you know what? We've got these people who are allies, who are also enemies of Christ here. And so the roots of Islamophobia and anti-Semitism are actually interconnected with one another. And what happened is that they replaced later, there was a variation of this, which said, okay, in order to solve this problem of the Jews who we have all this anti-Semitic persecution of, one way to solve this problem is you go be the settler colonizers. We tried it in the 11th, 12th, and 13th centuries. It didn't last long. Muslim resistance, ended up defeating them, and they got rid of the Crusader states. Then they came back, but this time, it's through an imperial legacy with a settler colonial population, and this was the way to redeem and respond to anti-Semitism in Europe, was go be a settler colonist outside.
There's more. Let me just quickly. This all makes sense to me. And some things of all people, Hannah Arendt did a really good study of the desecularization of Jews in the secularization of Jews in the Eastern Europe and such, as well as where anti-Semitism is coming from. It's a very complex picture, but the Christian Zionists are older and larger than Zionists, but more importantly, the Zionists, they were so on board with this. This wasn't like they needed to be talked into it. They were just as cynical and calculating as anyone. They understood exactly what it meant, what the Western powers, their manifest destiny or whatever meant, and they used that and they believed in it. And a lot of them, to the extent it matters when we're talking about anti-Semitism, would say frank anti-Semitic things about Jews in the Pali in the in the Eastern Europe, and it's astonishing to see those kinds of that kind of history So nothing makes sense here. I mean,
Well, actually, this is actually right. I think a lot of things can make sense if you have that longer historical
right.
perspective and you see what's transforming. And I would recommend for everyone, I did a series with my colleague, a modern Middle East historian, Dr. Ariel Salzman, called Palestine and the World: History in a Time of Genocide Denial. It's 7 parts. It goes through this full history. We just recorded the 8th episode last week, and it'll come out next week to update in the last 8 months of this genocide. It starts with the Crusades and it comes to the present. And that's very useful to reframe and rethink our analysis. However, it is interesting. Like, I think there is actually a mystery here that we need to really think about, is why is Marjorie Taylor Greene actually departing from the rest of what you think of as the typical MAGA right-wing fascistic? She's not in favor of the Iran war because why? Because we have like problems here at home, and we've got immigration, which we need to really deal with, and we need to train our efforts against China. So it's not like she's coming from some perspective that we don't want to intervene and destroy the Middle East like we've continued to do for the last 40, 50 years and devastate it. She also voted against the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which is at the root of trying to collapse, Judaism and Zionism together to make, it impossible to critique the, apartheid genocidal policies of the state of Israel. Why? Why did she vote against it? Her objection was because it puts a limitation on being able to make the typical attack upon the Jews by describing them as killers of Christ. That's an old, ancient anti-Semitic kind of way of talking.
That's what I was going to say.
This is what I want to mention. Go ahead, Rob.
That's in her case. She just might be really the actual anti-Semite. In her, that's the kind of consistent throughput, and that's how nuts everything is, right?